This is a webcast for U.S. history. This webcast is going to be covering SI4. Why do they hate us? Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. So let me start by just giving you a little personal narrative. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, I was on a school bus headed into downtown Los Angeles with a group of students on a field trip. And within about 30 to 40 minutes from leaving the campus, the bus driver got notification that he needed to turn around and return back to the high school. And we got word that the school leadership did not want the teachers and the students in Los Angeles because of what was unfolding in New York and then in Washington, D.C. The fear on that morning was that these terrorist attacks would kind of trickle across the United States, and it was possible that downtown Los Angeles could be targeted. So they didn't want us into the area. When we returned to school, everybody got off the bus, still very uncertain about what was going on. And everybody returned to their classrooms, and at that point, the whole school was glued to TV sets that were playing in the classrooms, and students were, and teachers and school officials were just watching the news reporting, kind of dumbfounded by what they were watching. And as I returned to my class, I dismissed my substitute who had been hired to cover for me that day, and so I just sat with my students, and after a while, one particular student just raised their hand and asked this pretty profound question, which was, why do they hate us? Just trying to come to grips with who are these people and what is the motive? Why would they attack us? And I didn't have an answer for them. At that point, I really didn't know much about Osama bin Laden, and I didn't know anything really of Al Qaeda. I should have, but I must admit I had a certain level of arrogance. So that really kick-started for me personally, and as well as nationally, an investigation to who this person and who this organization was that was responsible for the terrorist attacks. Now, I mentioned I should have known, and frankly, I guess all of us in the United States should have known. As you look at this graphic of the geography of the world with these different numbers, the numbers are relating to this key here. And what you can see here is a list of places around the globe and the dates in which these events took place. These are all attacks, terror attacks carried out by Al Qaeda, starting in 1992 and going on well beyond September 11th, 2001. September 11th, 2001 is identified right here. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that Al Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center in 1993. So September 11th, 2001 was the second time the World Trade Center had been attacked by Al Qaeda operatives. Now, of course, in 1993, the casualty numbers are 6. Even though it was being reported that a truck bomb parked underneath the World Trade Center building, blew up, killed some people. It didn't really capture our attention. It took thousands of people dying to capture our attention and to kind of figure out what is going on here. So Osama bin Laden, another way in which I and others in this country and the world should have known about Osama bin Laden is that he had been recording and distributing these recordings through various news agencies and kind of reporting to the world. If you want to look at this link, that would give you an example of uh, Osama bin Laden being interviewed by journalists and having him and his organization and news stories and things being projected, but people just weren't paying attention. So this guy, Osama bin Laden, we got to make sure that we understand that this guy's a Saudi. He's born in Saudi Arabia. That's important because he's going to operate eventually out of Afghanistan, but he's not an Afghani. He is a Saudi Arabian born Muslim. And you can see here in this bullet point that he's very devout and he's very conservative. His conservative Muslim beliefs are based upon the reading and application of the Quran as it was originally written. And so this is going to put him at odds with other Muslims and other Muslim nations in the world who are more modern in terms of their interpretations and applications of Islam. Osama bin Laden goes to Afghanistan, as you can see here, in 1979 to 1989. This is when the Soviet Union, during the Cold War, invaded its southern neighbor of Afghanistan. Because of the geopolitical quest for the Soviet Union to expand its power, but the Afghanis fight back. And Osama bin Laden helped to organize freedom guerrilla resistance fighters to fight in Afghanistan to protect Afghanistan from the Soviet invasion. Now, of course, in the midst of the Cold War, our greatest enemy is the Soviet Union. And when I say our, I'm talking about the United States of America. So we, the government of the United States, began to supply training and military supplies to the Afghanis and all these different rebel groups, which includes Osama bin Laden. During that time, he is a partner, maybe even call him an allied partner, during the Cold War, who is opposing our arch enemy, the Soviet Union. It's not the first, and probably won't be the last, of an individual and an organization that starts with U.S. sponsorship and assistance, but then will turn on the United States later. So Al-Qaeda, that's Osama bin Laden's organization. This is an Arabic term meaning the base, so it's like the base, the foundation of this conservative, radical Islamic movement. And as I showed you in the graphic before, Al-Qaeda and its terrorist operations were occurring globally. So they have no problem hitting, killing peoples, hitting and affecting nations all over the globe. So this isn't just an Al-Qaeda versus the United States story. One of the interesting things about Al-Qaeda is it's stateless. That's kind of the world that we live in which there are threats and security issues with people and organizations that don't have their root in any one country. So exactly who are you attacking and how are you destroying these stateless organizations definitely becomes a post 9/11 challenge. And they use as tactics insurgencies and terror to be able to fulfill their religious and political objectives. Some of the terms that you hear associated with this is jihad, this Arabic term that is oftentimes interpreted as holy war, which it does have that connotation, although the word is a little bit more complex. Deals with this idea of struggle. And a fatwa, another Arabic term, is the idea of like a court ruling, like a judge giving a ruling. And in this sense, a fatwa can be issued, which is a Islamic ruling. Um, and fatwas could be calling for jihads or holy wars. Now we have to also understand that there's another group that's involved here in this 9/11, post 9/11 story, and that's the Taliban. The Taliban are a particular, very conservative, radical set of Muslims in Afghanistan, and like Osama bin Laden, they read the Quran and interpret and apply the Quran as it was originally written centuries ago. Following the defeat of the Soviet Union as they tried to invade Afghanistan, there is a power play for who will control Afghanistan. And the Taliban in 1996 asserts control over the country and governmental authority. And because there are certain religious sympathies between the Taliban and Osama bin Laden, the Taliban welcomed Osama bin Laden and provided him refuge and a place to live and to continue training insurgency agents to be able to conduct their jihad fatwa operations all over the world. One of the things I want to say there is that Osama bin Laden needed refuge in Afghanistan because his own country of Saudi Arabia had banished him, had kicked him out of the country. So this is where we get the blending together of the Taliban and Al Qaeda, two separate groups, but now kind of in tandem in Afghanistan. So one of the things that we have to understand about this question, why do they hate us? What are the motives of Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda? Well, we have to look back into the historical record. We'll come to the Persian Gulf War. This is the first war in Iraq. And you can see the span of time there. This war was relatively short, August of 1990 to February 1991. The United Nations authorized the use of force. Of course, the United States would represent the largest portion of that military force, but this is really a world action, a global action of multinational military forces led by the United States. This is during the presidency of George H.W. Bush. This is George Bush the First, or the Elder. And the United Nations authorized this force to be able to go in and liberate this tiny little Middle Eastern country called Kuwait that you see here shaded in green. This military operation was authorized because Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, had ordered his military forces to go in and to occupy Kuwait. And the world looked at that Iraqi military operation as violating the independence and sovereignty of the nation of Kuwait. And there was worldwide support for Kuwait and worldwide condemnation for Iraq. Well, in order for UN multinational military forces to be able to go in to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi forces, you have to send troops. And one of the major nations that received these troops to liberate Kuwait was Saudi Arabia. As you can see here, this square representing U.S. forces, and then there's also some other countries represented like Britain, the French. And so collectively together, these forces developed military bases in Saudi Arabia and then operated out of Saudi Arabia to liberate Kuwait and defeat the Iraqi military forces. Well, that is a triggering event in the mind of Osama bin Laden and his Al Qaeda organization. You can see here OBL is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden responds to American and other Western military forces that developed bases in Saudi Arabia as a defiling of the Holy Land. And because Saudi Arabia was defiled by the presence of military boots on the ground by Western forces of Western nations, Osama bin Laden issues a fatwa, a ruling, to conduct a terror war against these Western nations. Now, of course, the government of Saudi Arabia welcomed these Western military forces. They were very fearful of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And so they gave the authority for these Western forces to start bringing in their troops and their stockpiles for what we call the Persian Gulf War. But the Saudi Arabian government and Osama bin Laden don't necessarily have the same viewpoint. Just another map kind of showing you Western forces of this UN coalition that is going to liberate Kuwait and destroy the Iraqi military. So they're all over the Middle East, these Western military bases, not just in Saudi Arabia. I'm also showing you again just another map and showing you places in the world in which Al Qaeda has attacked using terrorist tactics. Which number one here takes us back to New York City and the World Trade Center on 9/11, 2001. Washington, D.C. is also targeted that day. But their terror attacks are all over the world, including in the Middle East and other Arab Muslim nations. I'm showing you this picture of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. You can see the destruction of this building here. This building was detonated by 3 suicide bombings, just absolutely destroying the building and killing 35, which included 9 Americans. And Al Qaeda was responsible for this. So again, this shows you that Al Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, who's a Saudi-born national, is at risk from these terror attacks, just like the United States has been at risk from these terrorist attacks. So I want to make the point really clear here, is that Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda aren't just hitting the United States. They're not just killing Americans, but they are threatening peoples all over the world, including Osama bin Laden's birth country, because he is at odds and has different political and religious opinions of the government of Saudi Arabia. You can see here these quotes are coming from Osama bin Laden of why he has so much disdain for his home nation of Saudi Arabia and why Saudi Arabia came under attack as well as the United States has. So what is the Osama bin Laden Al Qaeda objectives? What are their motives? Why are they attacking these places all over the world? Well, number one is to purify the Holy Land of the infidels, and also to remove secular Islamic governments that Al-Qaeda deems as not being Islamic enough. And of course, that's according to their reading and application of the Quran as it was originally written centuries ago. We need to remember that Saudi Arabia has two of the most holy Islamic sites, Mecca and Medina. And that's why when boots on the ground were stationed here in Saudi Arabia to liberate Kuwait against Iraq, Saddam Hussein saw that as a defiling of his holy land because of these two sites that are located in Saudi Arabia. Of course, the third site is in Jerusalem, which is the Dome of the Rock. Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden really has their eyes on history. If you remember your World War I history, the Central Powers were made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire had ruled North Africa and the Middle East territories, as well as what we now call Turkey. And the Ottoman Empire and the Central Powers lose World War I, and so therefore they lose territory. The Ottoman Empire ceases to exist, and the Muslim empire crumbles because now these territories that were once controlled by Muslim empires is now being controlled by Western nations, particularly France and Great Britain. And so one of the motives of Al-Qaeda and why they attack is to try to reverse this trend. They want to try to renew the Muslim caliphate that it was once called, to return a Muslim dominance, not just to the Middle East and to Arabic nations, but really to extend it, to be able to return to a political, religious, and economic dominance within the modern world that the West has been able to take. As we see the rise of Europe, we see that coincides with the decline of the Eastern Arabic Muslim Empire. So the Al-Qaeda operations was really an attack on the West, Europe, as well as the United States, to be able to minimize their role and power in the world, to be able to increase the Islamic Muslim role and influence. And of course, the United States is seen as the most influential and powerful of these Western nations that has taken away, in the eyes of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, the economic, religious, and political influence of the Muslim world. And so the theory would be to attack, destroy the United States, and then that would allow for this Muslim empire to advance. So you can see there, the United States is called the Great Satan by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. So the United States imperialist policies and actions, its longtime support of the modern nation of Israel since 1948, the United States being the leader of the infidels, and particularly because we seem to be the power base of Western culture, which Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda would see as pure evil. All of these reasons put together creates a strong anti-United States perspective from Al-Qaeda and gives strong motivation for Al-Qaeda to attack and try to destroy this great Satan that they're so fearful and threatened by.